So let's take a look at using the CRP to calculate our drift, and then once we have our drift, it'll then allow us to calculate what our heading needs to be and what our ground speed is. So the scenario we've got is the wind is 150 at 15 knots. The track we want to fly across the ground is 210 degrees, and our TAS is 100 knots. So the first thing we need to do is put the wind into the CRP, and we do this first by setting the wind direction at the top there. So we have 150 set at the top there. Then going to slide the board in the middle to 100, so that dot's now over 100, so that's our TAS set on the CRP. We're then going to add the wind, and there's a few different ways of doing this. I think the easiest way is to use what we call the wind down method. So essentially my wind is 15 knots, so I'm counting down 15 from 100. So we can count down, or we can do 100 minus 15 gives us 85. So we're just going to bob a dot on the 85. We're then at the top going to spin the wheel round, and we're going to select our track. So in this case we've got 210. And then if we zoom in and have a look where the dot is now, we can count across 2, 4, 6, so 8 degrees to the right. So that gives our drift of 8 degrees to the right. So that means as we're flying along, the wind is going to be pushing us to the right by 8 degrees. So if you have a question in your exam, it might ask you what the drift is for a certain scenario. That's the answer. That's how you'd work it out. For planning purposes, we're now interested in what we need to do to prevent that drift so that we can maintain the track that we want to do. So what we're going to do is spin the wheel 8 degrees to the right. And so the way I think of it is, if the dot's to the right, I spin the wheel to the right. The other way of thinking it is, the dot's to the right, you spin it clockwise. If the dot's to the left, we would spin it to the left or anti-clockwise. So that's the real kind of gotcha with this. You need to spin it the right way. So for me, if the dot's to the right, I spin it to the right, which decreases the numbers. And again, if I have a look at the top, that tells me my heading that I need to steer is 202. And then what I do need to do is, if I go back to that slide, this dot here and this dot here need to be exactly the same. So they're both showing 8 degrees. So that's still showing 8 and that's showing 8. In some scenarios, those two numbers can be slightly different. So if I was to spin that to 202 and that moved to 10, them two wouldn't be matching, so that wouldn't be an accurate answer. So what I would have to do is then spin the wheel to 10, which in this case would be 200, and then I would check again, and hopefully they will be matching up. But again, on some cases that may move it to 9, so if that's 9, that needs to be 9, so then that would be back to 2-1. So it's a bit of jiggery pokery at the end sometimes to get a really accurate answer, to make sure that the dot and the line at the top both give the same. But in this case, and in lots of cases, it's the same the first time we do it. And then the last thing we can do, we can zoom in and have a look at our ground speed. And our ground speed is, if we look at the dot, 92 knots.